Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino is facing questions about why the families of Paul Bernardo's victims were not notified sooner about transferring the serial killer to a medium security prison. It was a decision made by the Correctional Service of Canada. When the government and the minister knew, has resulted in calls for the minister to be fired. But it's not the first time a prison transfer has drawn the ire of Canadians. 5 years ago, the convicted killers of 9-year-old Tori Stafford were moved from maximum to medium security. Following a federal review, Terry Lynn McClintock was sent to a multi-level federal prison after a public outcry over her being sent to a healing lodge. Michael Rafferty was sent to La Macasa. That's the same institution Bernardo was transferred to in Quebec. Rodney Stafford is the father of Tori Stafford, and I spoke with him earlier this morning about his experience. Rodney Stafford, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
No problem.
What was your reaction when you heard the news that Paul Bernardo was being transferred to a medium security prison?
My first reaction was I was like I've been saying, a slap in the face, only because this is something we fought for 4.5 years ago. And it just sucks to see a couple more high profile cases having to go fight for their rights.
Yeah. And when you say you fought for it 4 years ago, remind people what you were calling for 4 years ago and still now.
Well, it started out with us doing a protest to have Terry Lynn McClintock return from a healing lodge back to a traditional prison. But then we found out during that time that Michael Rafferty had been transferred from maximum to medium, and we went back to protest that on April 8th, 2019. But everything got pretty quiet shortly thereafter.
So you did have success with Terry Lynn McClintock was returned to prison, but Michael Rafferty was not, I don't believe, returned to he stayed in a medium level prison. Is that correct?
Yeah, Terry Lynn she was removed from the healing lodge and returned back to medium security. But both Michael Rafferty and Terry Lynn are both in medium at the moment.
What does it do for a family member to see that happen? Like, what was that experience like for you in terms of re-victimization and reliving some of the pain that you felt initially?
Oh, it does. It brings everything right back, because like I've been trying to say, that when we went through the courts, we did the murder trial, we did the appeal, he was found guilty, everything, like, why should we have to be fighting during the course of his incarceration to keep him incarcerated when we fought for that 25 years? If the max that he can get is 25 years, we shouldn't hear anything for 25 years. No, not a couple of years into his sentence.
Corrections Canada, in this instance, has not explained why Bernardo was transferred to this medium security prison, citing his privacy rights. What do you make of the way Corrections Canada manages an inmate's or an offender's privacy rights versus what the families need to know?
Everything's in reverse. The families and the victims should be receiving all the information, and the perpetrator shouldn't be entitled to anything. Like, everything's backwards.
And I'm sure you've been following the political side of it too. The fact that Minister Mendicino's office knew and didn't tell him. Minister Mendicino obviously is limited in what he can do. What do you make of the political response to this? My political response is it always comes down to, well, what was it? It's always somebody else's problem. They push it on to somebody else and it never gets resolved. But the response in this one is there is no response. Yeah. There isn't, none at all. There's no reason that anybody should be having to go through this, and I feel horrible for the families. What do you think is the change that's needed? Is it that families need to be told when offenders are moved? Is it that families need to have a say in it? Like, what would make a difference, do you think?
Oh, a lot of changes. Families having a say, being able to participate, change the laws, justice reform, changes to the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
That still hasn't been adjusted according to the changes in laws over the course of the last 7 years. So
Yeah. How frustrating is that for you to have lived through something very similar to this and now see another group of families going through it again?
Very frustrating, knowing how it affects you as a person and having to relive it, and it's far more traumatizing. Just because I can sit here and hold a smile on my face doesn't mean I'm not going through pain the remainder of the day. Like it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, end on that in terms of how you're doing. It's been, is it 14 years now since Tori was murdered?
Yes.
And how are you doing? I can't even imagine.
To be honest, I'll say I'm well, but things have been so far up and down. Like I start getting into a rhythm where I'm working, and then I get into an emotional fit because something comes up with one of the perpetrators and we're back in the courts, or I shouldn't have to think about it for at least that 25 years that we were promised in the courts when we went to trial.
Yeah.
So why do we have to continue reliving this stuff?
Well, listen, I hope that this interview didn't bring up trauma for you. I know that you want to talk a little bit to try and get change, so I appreciate you making the time to do that, Rodney.
No, I appreciate you reaching out. And as much as I have to go through, I don't mind going through it because I know I can handle it. I want to be able to help those who cannot, they don't have a voice. They're afraid to use their voice. They can't bring themselves to use their voice. Just need them to know that there's others out there. We're all trying to fight.
Rodney Stafford, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.